everybody, Grant Kemp with CreativeCashFlow.com here again to give you some more information on title, what title searching can do for you and how that can turn into a bunch of money. If you haven't already watched it, I really recommend that you go out and you watch the basic understandings video so you understand kind of what liens are, what title is dealing with, and then also watch our title search video because it's gonna really explain a lot of the basics that you're gonna need to understand before you start watching this video. But this is kind of the culmination of that. This is why that stuff matters, because at the end of the day, even though the title companies and the attorney's offices will do these title searches for you, having this information in my back pocket is what allowed me to make about $65,000 on a deal that otherwise would have just been trash, that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to close in time. So pay close attention because it's going to get rough. Here, there's going to be a lot of slides. We're going to show a lot of information here that's going on, but it's really valuable for you to know what can happen in this title search realm because it can get pretty crazy. So let's start on it. This is my phone call. This is the phone call that I got from my lead source. So when they called me, I pulled all of this information out, and watch our negotiation series about how to pull this information out from people, asking open-ended questions, things like that. But mom owned the property first. We got that much. Then stepdad owned the property. Stepdad came into the picture. So because of the community property laws, 50-50 ownership at that point in time. Mom dies before stepdad. So stepdad is still alive. Moving on. Stepdaughter, mom's kid, stepdaughter, who is our caller, had been caring for the stepdad full-time. The daughter says that the stepdad had left the property to the great-grandson, okay? So daughter of mom, stepdaughter, had a son, who then had a son, and stepdad was supposedly wanting that grandson to have the property. But the trick here was she couldn't find the will. So it was as good as nothing, but that was just information. Oh, well, no, he wanted it to go to so-and-so. So we had that for us. Stepdaughter had talked about the brother as having done some crooked things. Lots of times that's one side of the story. We're not sure what's going on, but still, it's information that we got from the call. Brother did something funky in the 80s. I've taught this series before at investor club meetings, and my favorite response to that was, who didn't? Brother did something funky in the 80s. I had an audience member go, who didn't? Anyway, the loan is in some other guy's name, quote unquote. And this was because of the brother's doings, right? So I just want to point out here that everything that we're talking about today is public knowledge. This is public information, stuff that is easily accessible through the public realm, Public Information Act, that kind of stuff. So we're going to start going to work. This was my phone call. Now it's time to start going to work. Now it's time to try and figure things out. By the way, I knew that I had a short fuse because we were facing foreclosure. We were right near the end of that foreclosure time period where I think I had a little bit over a week to get this stuff done. We'll talk about time frames a little bit later. So I knew it was something for me to start acting on. I needed to go out there and figure this stuff out. So the first step, like you saw from our title search videos, I go out to the CAD, look for the title or for the property's legal description, found that, and I'm going to plug that into Rome, which in Dallas is our county clerk's system. Again, all of these examples I'm showing here are in Dallas County. However, the principles are going to be the same whatever county you're in. So just watch the title search video so you can figure out a little bit more about those principles. So when I do a search with my legal description, we put in Lot 16, Block 2, Pleasant Run Acres, and I pull 3 pages worth of stuff. The earliest record that I have is February 3rd of 2012. Okay? So I knew that this was an issue because I knew that the parents had bought this property in the 70s, according to our lead source. So going back to 2012 wasn't enough. So what you want to do is you want to try and be as vague as possible while still hammering down into the property that you're looking for, because these title companies, a lot of times when they record, they're putting in different kind of information that might be different for each property. So we're going to readjust how we search for that, and we're just going to do Lot 16, Block 2, Subdivision, Pleasant. Instead of Pleasant Run Acres, we're going to do Pleasant. By pulling that up, I get 12 pages worth of stuff. 12 pages worth of stuff. And then if you actually look at the legal description that's pulling in, we've got Pleasant Manor, we've got Pleasant Lake Estates. This isn't our property. This isn't what we're looking for, and we know that. 12 pages worth of stuff, I've got 291 results if you see in that top line. That's too much. I'm not going to sift through 291 pages to figure out what our property is. So we have to readjust how we're going to search for that. The next step that we take is we're going to mix and match our seller's name along with the lot and block. I'm just going to knock out the subdivision altogether and not even search that. Well, I knew that stepdad's name was Terry Robinson. So I put in Terry Robinson, which is last name first kind of situation. So Robinson Terry, lot 16, block 2. We pull up some information here, and then boom, we get new information. Looking at the legal description here, I can tell that they did lot 16, block 2, PLSNT, Pleasant Run A. They didn't even finish acres. They put Pleasant as PLSNT. So that's great. We know something more now that we can use to search. So I'm going to go back with that, and I'm going to use that in a little bit. But what we want to see here is the document types that I'm pulling up for Robinson, or for Terry Robinson. I see we've got deed of trust, we've got deed, we've got a mechanics lien, so we're going to keep that in mind. We're going to look for that. We've got more deeds, we've got a release. So that's what we want to look for. But what I'm really paying attention to here is that the earliest recordation that I have on file for him goes back to 1978. He's got a deed and a deed of trust where the other party in that is Grinnan Mortgage. Okay? That deed of trust is between him and Grinnan Mortgage. So that's when he bought the house. They got a loan in 1978. The deed of trust was received by Grinnan Mortgage, and I'm going to assume that at that point in time, title issues were clear. Because if you watch our other videos, watch our basic understandings and title videos, subject to videos, you'll understand that by the time a lender puts title policy on a loan, everything should be clean up to that point, we're going to presume. So what did we learn? We learned that stepdad got title in '78 with a bank loan. Presumably all title issues are clear up to that point. We also learned that the title company hates us, wants to make our life hard, and spelled Pleasant Run Acres as PLSNT, but we also have some Pleasant Run Acres out there as Pleasant, so we've got multiple spellings on record. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back, lot 16, block 2, Pleasant Run PLSNT. Do a search that way. Well, this pulls up a bunch of stuff. And what it shows us right here is that we've got our 1978, our February 1978, where Terry and Elaine Robinson were the grantor of a deed of trust to Grinnan Mortgage. Okay? If we look at the basics of what a mortgage looks like, our warranty deed, the warranty deed is what actually gives you ownership of the property. Okay? In a warranty deed, the grantor is going to be the seller. The grantor, the person giving deed, is going to be the seller. The grantee, the person receiving deed, is going to be the buyer in that situation. Well, a deed of trust is going to be given from the buyer to the bank. So the buyer is the grantor, and the grantee is the bank, or I'm sorry, the beneficiary. You'll see it listed both ways. Now, that is actually what creates the lien on the deal, is the deed of trust. That is the lien. And your trustee is going to be the attorney that's foreclosing on the property. So we're going to go back and we're going to look through Pleasant Run, PLSNT, and we're going to kind of see what we're spotting here. Now, again, you saw that at the beginning in 1978, February 22nd, 1978, our sellers took deed from a ton of people. Now, the interesting thing here is by looking at this, all of these people that were listed in this were actually just trustees. The paperwork on this particular property was all over the place, and these trustees shouldn't have been listed in the way that they were, but by spotting and looking through that documentation like I showed you how to do in the title search video, I was able to tell the trustees just got listed as the grantors here. Next, we're looking at October 22nd of 1985, where we have a deed going from Terry and Elaine Robinson to Jerry Powell. So that's new information because now Player 3 has joined the game. Now we have another person that we need to be looking for, okay? So let's regroup a little bit. In February of '78, our sellers, I put in quote because that's not who we're talking to, but our sellers, the people who owned the house, take title. There's multiple property spellings in the legal description. We know that much. Jerry Powell, this is the brother, by the way, that sister told me about, took title in 1985, but we didn't see a release of lien. And we need to figure out if the new lien was taken. Did he take out title and get a new loan and Grinnan Mortgage release or anything like that? So that's what we need to search for. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at name searches. We're going to start searching people's names. We've got 3 people we need to look at this point in time: Terry, Elaine Robinson, and Jerry Powell. So first, let's look at Elaine Robinson. Well, there's a mechanics lien that comes out in 1984 for accurate AC and heating. That's of interest to us, so let's take a look at that. Let's see what we can figure out. I'm going to search for Accurate AC as the name, and I'm going to keep the lot and block in there to see what pulls up if there's a release for this lien in there. And when I do that, this is the information I pull. Well, A, I don't have a release for that particular property. I've got a release for lot 16, block 2 of Grove Lawn, but not of Pleasant Run Acres. That's what we see at the very top. We see a mechanics lien, and we see that assignment there. But we don't see any kind of release associated with this. So then I'm going to search for just Accurate AC. I'm going to see what has Accurate AC done. And when I do that, I see that the most recent item that we're pulling is from 1999. Now, if you'll notice, there's 103 pages. There's 2,500 results for Accurate AC's filings. They were doing a ton of mechanics liens for people, a ton of them. And then it just stopped in 1999. So what does that imply for us? After searching Google, I see that there's no results for Accurate AC in this area. I think there was one in many, many states over. They're probably out of business. Air conditioning companies go out of business pretty commonly. It's just part of the world here. And even if they were in business, something happening in 1984 honestly is past the statute of limitations. They don't have the time, or they don't have the ability to enforce that kind of lien. But still, it's worth us researching and looking into, right? So I see that that exists. That's one thing for me to keep in mind. Now, in 1986, when going back to my Elaine Robinson, in 1986, January of, she gets a release from Gil Richard Co. Well, who the heck is Gil Richard Co.? I haven't seen Gil Richard Co. up until this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the magnifying glass so that we can see that document. And if you look at the front page of that document, we're going to read what it tells us. It says that Terry Lee Robinson and wife Elaine Robinson, payable to the order of Grinnan Mortgage Company, which we knew, and subsequently assigned to the Richard Gill Company. All right? So this release of lien is for that loan that came out from Grinnan. Grinnan eventually passed that loan off, assigned that over to another company. You'll hear about that a lot. If you've got a mortgage on your own home, you may have even had your mortgage sold. People buy notes on the secondary market, which is a great strategy, by the way, for us, for owner financing. I love selling notes. And you can watch more about that in How to Sell Your Note video, but it's really a good strategy for us. You can make some good money there. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just a straight up name search. I'm going to take out the lot and block. I'm just going to look for Elaine Robinson and see what pulls up. Well, one thing that pulls up is an abstract judgment. Now, she's a grantor. She put the abstract judgment, so it doesn't really matter that much. But I also see that there's a release of that judgment, so I'm not too terribly worried about that. We can just cancel that out. So let's regroup again. Our sellers take title in 78. Grinnan Mortgage releases that title in 86. We now have done a search for mom and dad because the first person we looked for was dad, and we saw all the information that came out with that. By the way, that mechanics lien on dad was the same. It was the Accurate AC mechanics lien. So then we're going to go back and we're going to look for the brother. Well, the brother, when we look up Jerry A. Powell, we see all kinds of stuff out here. We see that in 1985, at the very top, he takes deed to the property. In October 22nd, he takes deed. He's the grantee from Elaine Robinson. Well, 2 months later, he's the grantor of deed to Cindy Rich. Okay, so now I'm starting to connect the dots with what my seller told me over the phone. Here's the funky stuff in the middle of the 80s, 1985, that we need to be paying attention to. So now our radar, now we're starting to kind of dig in a little bit, okay? Took deed in October, sells the deed over in December. And then in 1987, we see deed of trusts start to pop up. Okay. Now remember, there was a release of that Grinnan mortgage in 1986, I believe, right? But we start to see these deeds of trust pop up. And so let's look at that. Let's look at that in order. Well, the deed of trust on the left is giving the property from Elaine over to Jerry, and then our deed of trust on the right goes from Jerry over to Cindy Rich. So now we've got some funkiness that we're looking at. We've got Bobby and Cindy Rich. Well, now I'm led to believe that these are the people that the property went into, that our seller, the contact that we had, did not know their names, but now we do. So we're going to do a name search on them and see what happens, right? Because now we've got this situation where these guys have a claim to the property because they have been deeded the house. Jerry Powell in 1985, December of, deeds the property to Cindy Rich. Interestingly enough, 2 years later is when he deeds the property over to Bobby Rich, right? So it takes a couple of years before he puts that deed. This is the funky. This is what we're looking for. So if we do a name search for Bobby and Cindy Rich, what we see is that in December of 85, they have a deed of trust to Dallas-Fort Worth Mortgage Company. Okay? So when they got that property deeded to them from Bobby Rich, they took out a new mortgage. All right, so this is good information. We're getting somewhere. Now, they own the house. They took out a mortgage. Everything seems fine up to this point, right? Parents owned the house, Elaine and Terry. They gave the house to Jerry. Jerry sells the house to Bobby and Cindy. Bobby and Cindy get a loan. No big deal. Let's regroup. Sellers take title in 78. Grinnan releases the mortgage in 86. Powell takes deed in 85. Deeds the property Bobby and Cindy Rich. They get a loan. Powell then does assumptions in 87. That's kind of the funkiness of those deeds of trust, is that they were assumption deeds of trusts. And then he deeds the property back to his mom with another deed of trust, which creates a new lien. So let's look back at that situation and why this is crazy. Because you look at that bottom of in August of 87, Jerry Powell deeds the property to Elaine Robinson. Well, here's the problem with that. Is when did Jerry Powell get the property back? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself. He gave the property in 1985 to Cindy Rich. Remember, I was saying 2 years later he gave the property to Bobby. 2 years later, Bobby deeds the property back to Jerry, right? So he gives in 85, he gives the property to Cindy. In 87, her husband gives the property back to him. And then in 87, that same day, he deeds the property back to his mother. Those deeds of trust that we had were both assumption deeds of trust. So what it looks like happened is Jerry takes the property for a short period, a couple of months, so that he can put Cindy Rich in there so that Cindy Rich can get a loan. And then they give the property back to him so that he can give the property back to his mom through assumptions. So it gets really crazy here because now you've got essentially subject to properties happening, subject to transactions happening, so that there's a loan in Bobby and Cindy Rich's name, but Elaine Robinson is now the owner of the property, and it went through Bobby Rich. And he put liens on the property with these deeds of trust, but he never released them. I know you may see releases on the screen, but notice the date. That's 2016. That's when I came in and fixed the issue. There were no releases up to this point. So if we look back at the Bobby and Cindy Rich side just to check for releases there, we don't see anything on that side either for a release. So regrouping once more. Our sellers take title in 78. Grinnan Mortgage releases that loan in 86. Jerry Powell takes title in 85. He then gives the property to Cindy Rich, and the Riches take out a loan. Powell then does assumptions of that loan in 87, where he takes assumption and then lets his mom assume his assumed note, and then deeds the property back to his mom, not the stepdad, by the way. He's only deeding the property back to his mom, along with another deed of trust, and no one has released any of these liens. So here's something important to think about too. We saw that he deeded the property over to his mom and not his stepdad. Okay? Let's talk about intestate succession. Intestate succession is what happens to a property, basically who owns it when who dies, right? So the first thing that everybody's familiar with is wife and husband own a property 50-50. Doesn't matter if the wife buys the property first and then gets married. Doesn't matter when that happens. Because of community property laws, 50-50 ownership between wife and husband, even though the deed was only to the wife. When the wife dies, her 50% goes to the husband, in this case, the stepfather. Okay? Well, with intestate succession, when a stepfather passes, the property is actually transferred to the nearest blood relatives. This would be brother, sister, parent, aunt, something like that. It goes to the blood relative first. Okay? Now, even if it went to the stepkids, it would be split evenly among them. So we've got brother and sister. I was talking to sister. It would have been split among them. But it doesn't. Right now, as it stands, mom's 50% went to dad. Dad dies. Now we have to start searching for blood relatives to figure out what's going to happen with that. So I've got a representation of what we're looking at here. You hear about clouded title? We got a bunch of clouds. We got a bunch of clouds on this title. There is funkiness that went on in the 80s, for sure. But then all of a sudden, we have a bright ray of shining hope and light show up for us because, hallelujah, she found the will. It was on top of an armoire as they were starting to move. It was up there. It was signed. It's verified, notarized as being original. she found the will. So thank goodness, that finally gives us a breath of light. So now we get to regroup again. Obviously, we've got all our original information. They take title, they get the release of their loan. Powell takes title, he deeds the property over. There's a bunch of assumed notes that occur. Nobody's released any of these notes. But now we have a will giving the property to the great-grandson, which is our caller's minor grandson. So I say minor that way because for those of you who know, that adds another complication. Minors can't enter into contract law. Minors can't sign on anything. This kid was about 13 or 12, something like that. So he was not technically able to sign on anything about this property, even though the property was technically his. Here's the other trick. That will had not been probated. They just found the will, and it was just sitting there. So here's the thing I want to point out to you. This is a screen grab from my CRM when I initially got the call. It is 5/23/2016. I spoke to the seller, who is the stepdaughter, didn't want to give me her last name. She said she had another offer at $200,000 with a six-month lease back and no rent due. Well, guys, I'll tell you what, every lead that I get, if they're saying that they've got another offer coming in, I tell them I'll beat it. I'll beat it. You can beat it by $1. You can beat it with terms. You can beat it however. I'll beat any deal. She told me that. This house was worth $220. I said, you know what, lady? They're willing to give you $200. Go for it. I can't compete with that. That's crazy. But I will tell you what's going to happen. And watch our negotiation series so you can learn more about this, because I just went into how that transaction was going to go down. Told her when it went that way to call me back. Sure enough, that's what happens, right? So then what I want to point out is when I do go to the appointment, this is the piece of paper. It's actually a picture of the piece of paper that I'm faced with of their notification of foreclosure. It says that they're going to be foreclosed on in June 7th of 2016. So if you look at a calendar, that gave me 11 days to fix all of this garbage. Now, I made a follow-up call 5/27/17. You should always be following up. I hadn't heard back from her, but I followed up on the 27th to say, hey, how are things going with this deal? And sure enough, everything was playing out the way that I told her. She said, these guys are crooks. They're not being honest with me. And Grant, you've been honest with me the whole time. I appreciate that, so we're going to go with your offer instead. So I was able to get in there and contract this house for $125,000 or $135,000. I can't remember at that point in time what I contracted it for. So what did I have to do? What did I have to do to make this deal work? I had 11 days to make this deal work. So first step is I had to skip trace to find Bobby Rich. Bobby Rich was one of the parties that was on that the mortgage and all the funkiness that happened in the 80s, because his name is still on the mortgage. His name was on the mortgage notice that got sent that was being foreclosed on. That was the person whose name was on the loan with foreclosure, even though he didn't own the property because the ownership had gone back to Elaine and subsequently Father Terry, right? So I needed to contact him and figure out how I could get with the bank, because I needed permission from the borrower to talk to the bank, or you need permission from a borrower to talk to the bank about their account. Well, in order to get that, we had to talk with him. Well, I finally found him. By the way, that'sthem.com is a good way, a good resource that you can find people's cell phone numbers, that kind of stuff. I spoke to him. He was uncomfortable speaking to me. He had me address his attorney. I talked to his attorney. We got everything hashed out. I was able to explain the situation to him. I got with a probate attorney for my caller, and I paid to have the will probated because we needed to move quick on this. And my attorney contacted the bank and said, look, guys, this property's going under probate, and legally, banks are not able to foreclose on a property that's in the middle of probate. So she contacted them. I put together a package that put the will, the probate paperwork, the deed title search that I had done, screenshots, along with the downloaded copies of these deeds and deeds of trust and all that kind of stuff to show the proper chain of title. And I put a cover letter on it, and I faxed it over to our contacts this was Aquin that we were dealing with, I believe. And I faxed it over to them, and I said, look, this is what's going on. The owner of the property is not the person that has their name on the loan with you. And by the way, the owner of the property is dead and going through probate, and this means that you can't foreclose on the property anymore, and that stopped the foreclosure. I got a power of attorney for Bobby Rich, which allowed me to speak to them, and it stopped it by June 2nd. Okay, which, if you remember, was set for June 6th, or 7th, was the actual foreclosure date. So we stop that. We push it off. That gives us time to clear all of these clouds up. But then we get the fun part of this notice that gets filed on the 21st. Well, by the way, a notice is not a valid lien. A notice is not, you can publicly file anything you want. He just files this thing. So we click on it, and basically he's trying to say that he has a legal claim to all of the legal, what's the word I'm looking for? Costs, expenses that he's used over the years to keep this property out of foreclosure, filed a bunch of that stuff. That's just another cloud there. So what we had to do is, after skip tracing, after speaking to the attorneys, after hiring the probate attorney, getting everything probated, getting the house out of foreclosure, at that point in time, I had to get a release from the brother on all of these liens. All of these liens that he had for Elaine and Bobby and just all these liens that were sitting out there. We needed releases to get clear title. So I got those releases, and then I bought the property out of the estate. Stepdaughter was the executor, so I was able to talk with her about this kind of stuff, get it out of the estate. It's technically grandson's money that he now has in his bank account waiting for him as he becomes a major, not a minor. And I fixed and flipped it. And I netted about $65,000 on the deal, right? So you can see here our releases that all occurred, that we had to get signed. And the moral of the story here is that 99% of the time, your title company is going to take care of your search for you. 99% of the time, everything's fine with your attorney doing it for you. But there is that time like this where there was no way. I mean, title companies can take weeks to get your title search back to you. I had 11 days. I had 11 days to make this deal work. And if I wasn't able to do my title searches on day one and start that ball rolling, there's no way that I would have been able to close this deal and get it done in time and make $65,000. Shoot, $65,000 is more than I was making at my corporate America job before I quit and came. And this took me a week to get things done, right? Knowing the details can be the difference between money and no money. Knowing the ins and outs is the difference between getting money and not getting money. And that's why you're watching this video series. That's why you signed up with creativecashflow.com. That's why you're watching through Propelio.com and all their educational series that are going out there, is because you've got to know the details. You've got to know how to do this stuff so that you can outperform other people. The whole conversation started, if you remember, by me outperforming my competitor and telling her exactly what they were going to be doing before it happened so that she believed me and knew that I was being honest with her. And then she chose me, even though my offer was well beneath what they were adjusting their offer to become. Okay? So knowing those details is very important, and you can make a lot of money that way. So that wraps up this case study here. It's a lot to fill in your brain, but it's good information to have. It's a good idea to realize what's out there and what can happen. Again, like always, I want you to stay engaged. Engage yourself with these videos. Watch the entire series. If you're really enjoying what you're seeing, sign up for the creativecashflow.com expert series. You know, sign up for the pro series and really dive deeply into this stuff so that you can go out there and you can really just sling around and buy these houses and outperform everybody else that's out there. I also do personal mentoring. I've mentioned this several times before. I do personal mentoring. If you want somebody to hold your hand, to be there to help you evaluate your deals as they come in, talk to me about it. But until then, like our videos, find us on Facebook, find us on YouTube, all that kind of good stuff. Like, share, tell the world about how awesome we are, and we'll go from there. So until then, keep watching, and I'll see you next time.